our interaction with some of our partners in Europe and elsewhere, there has been a sense of a patronizing bullying toward you choose this or else. And the recent legislation passed in the United States of America by the House of Representatives, we found a most unfortunate bill that we'd hope the media would say more about, because when we believe in freedom, as I'm saying, it's freedom for everybody. You can't say because Africa is doing this, you will then be punished by the United States. So that's been a disappointing passage of legislation by one house, and we hope the other house will not agree to such offensive legislation. So indeed, it is important that all of us accept our ability to hold different opinions. We are, after all, sovereign nations that are regarded as equal in terms of the United Nations Charter. We may differ in terms of economic.
Abolish the monarchy. In that conference, we couldn't find a single monarchist outside the Royal Pavilion. How ironic! I believe that the disillusioned of Brighton should have a chance to vote on this issue, because I believe, like most Liberal Democrats, in democracy. Democracy with a capital D.
The shock of the supply chains from the global health emergency and rampant profits. 73% profits are up since 2019. Pay at the top is going through the roof.
That. What I'm
no
saying
one's worried about pay at the top, Anne.
You cannot match inflation.
Why not?
With pay. I've just explained, because then you get into the
What
wage
about
price
profits?
spiral. Then you get into the wage price
But people at the top are all right. Their profits can carry on going through the roof.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my new video. My name is AJ, I'm your host for today. I'm going to be taking you through some news articles for today and the last few days. And before I do, I'm going to talk through some of the clips I showed you in the beginning of the show. And my first clip is one of the most funniest clips I've ever seen. Literally is hilarious. You've seen Biden with a big smile, not Biden, Blinken I mean, had a big smile in his face. He had a bounce in his step. He's jumping up and down. He's tapping the South African foreign minister on her shoulder, and he had a big smile in his face. He looked like he got some hot girl's number in a nightclub or something. He comes out with, shaking his fists up in the air, thinking, yeah, I'm so happy, and he looks like he's really happy, smiley. He sat down. Then the foreign minister for South Africa, she let loose. She let loose with some truths, and that must have hurt Blinken. He sat there sitting right next to us, taking it all. That's one of the funniest things I've seen in my life, and kudos to the foreign minister for South Africa. I thought she was very brave, very distinguished, and yeah, she's definitely one of my favorite foreign ministers in the world right now, and I just love that clip. The second clip was a clip of young Liz Truss. Believe me, that was an even funnier clip. And there she is, basically denouncing the royal family, denouncing the monarchy. And it's going to be really, really funny that if she becomes prime minister, or when I say when she becomes prime minister, when she becomes prime minister, she has to go in front of the Queen, and the Queen has to do all the ceremony and things like that, and she has to swear to the Queen and all of that. So it's going to be really, really funny and awkward. I'm sure a few people next to the Queen have probably showed her some of these clips, because the Queen is not stupid. She knows what goes on in the world, and anyone that denounces the Queen or royal family, they usually know about it. So I'm sure her face will be all over Twitter, and people will know about this clip just before she becomes prime minister. So it's going to be quite awkward. Other things she says she stands for democracy with a capital D. Well, I know a few other words she kind of stands for with a capital D, but I'm not going to go into it in this video, because this is not that kind of video. But as many of you know, she is famous for her affairs. She had an 8-year-long affair while she was married. She's still married to her husband, and yeah, let's not go any further on that, shall we? And the last clip was basically about this woman who said it's not right for wages to go up as part of inflation, and the guy on the left was saying, what about all of these executives making huge amounts of profits? All right for their wages to go up, but what about the rest of the population? So he's got a point, really. And I'm going to start with the final bit. You know, the issue is there's a lot of greedy people around in the world today, and I'm going to be talking about UK first of all. Landlords, for example, are increasing their rents. Now average rent price in London has gone up to £2,250, which is average rent for London. A couple of years ago it was 1,300 or 1,200, I believe. So it's gone up by almost double. In Manchester, it's gone up, where I live at the moment, in Manchester it's gone up by 23% rent over the past year, and rent is also increasing over other cities all over as well. So the landlords have no issues increasing their rent prices. Businesses are increasing their prices to match the inflation. So businesses, obviously, people say the inflation is in England is about 19% or 20%, I think the latest figures are. However, if you go to the supermarket and you compare the prices of your favorite item, compare it to a year ago, you'll see that most of it has gone up by 50%, or most of it has gone up by 100%, and these are just facts. And everything around you, all the businesses, you'll see everybody has basically increased their prices. It's only to basically feed the businesses, feed the people who are rich at the top. Workers, their wages are not increasing, and that's the problem. So people's wages are not increasing, yet they have to pay more for food, pay more for inflation, pay more for, you know, gas and electricity, pay more for rent. So everybody's salary is actually decreasing if you think about it. If everything else around you is increasing and your wage is not increasing, then your wage is actually going down. If you think about it, you are actually making less and less money every month. So that's the problem, really. And obviously they don't want, the businesses don't want you to increase your wage because they make less profits, and that's the problem, really. And let's talk about this scale of damage to UK companies by anti-Russia sanctions revealed. So finally, some articles are coming out saying, okay, maybe all of these sanctions are basically we're shooting ourselves. And we have been saying that from the beginning of this channel to other channels who speak the truth around the internet. You know who those are. There's only a few of us, guys. There's not many. And we have been saying this from the beginning. It's basically a circular firing squad. They're all shooting at themselves. They're all shooting at their own foot. They're all shooting at their colleagues. When they were sitting in front of that room outdoing each other for sanctions, they thought these sanctions will hurt Russia. In fact, they're hurting themselves. And this article has basically come out saying British companies are really badly affected, and you can see 71% of British businesses had assets which have been directly affected by restrictions imposed on Moscow by the UK and other governments. Nearly half of those firms reported cost increases and disruptions in production, while 44% said they had lost supplies, 42% suffered personal problems. And this does not count all of the inflation problems, all of the supply chain problems, obviously the cost of gas and oil, electricity. So a lot of Western companies are being affected more than what people like to think, more than what these Western papers like to think. You know, the ruble is not being turned into rubble. It's the Western governments and the Western businesses which are. So this is what I was talking about. UK faces the steepest real wage drop in a century, and Britain's projected plunge is staggering 7.75% by the end of the year. Pay rises in Britain could fall behind inflation by almost 8% later this year, and which is the real biggest fall in real wages for 100 years. I think this is quite optimistic. I think it's much worse, because, you know, even the minimum paid jobs, they are not getting increases. NHS staff has not been getting increasing. Last year all of these nurses who have been working throughout COVID, putting their own lives at risk, only had a 1% pay rise last year. And the government said, why don't you stand up and give these nurses a clap, and 1% pay rise. And that's it. They don't want a clap. They want a big enough salary which pays for, you know, all of the dangerous stuff that they've been working with COVID and everything else. So they deserve, you know, more recognition. They deserve more payments. And unfortunately, the NHS, you know, they're talking about there's going to be an NHS strike soon. The doctors might strike, or the nurses might strike as well. There's already a post office strike coming up. There's rail strikes happening all over UK. Lawyers are also striking as well. So Britain is going through some severe issues at the moment. Russia names conditions for BRICS global reserve currency. So obviously the first clip I showed you was the foreign minister of South Africa, and they're part of the BRICS, as well as India, Brazil, you know, and all these other new countries who want to join the BRICS. We're talking about Saudi Arabia, Turkey. So these are major countries. Obviously, don't forget China as well. How could I forget China? So these are all major countries with huge populations, and every one of these countries are starting to de-dollarize. And Russia has basically said, Russia names conditions for BRICS global reserve currency, and their condition is more transactions in national currencies of member states are needed first. So they are asking for all of these countries in the BRICS, as well as those who want to join the BRICS, to start de-dollarizing, start doing more transactions in their own national currencies. And this basically will speed up de-dollarization around the rest of the world as well. And you can see, you know, Russia and China have already thought about this, and already this is happening. You can see countries around the world starting to de-dollarize. You can see India starting to de-dollarize. They are doing more trades in their own currency and other currencies like the Chinese yuan and the Russian ruble as well. India is also has got its own Visa, MasterCard replacement as well, which Indians are using. So India is doing its bit. China is obviously doing its bit. Russia is definitely doing its bit. Then you got South Africa, which is also doing it, and this is the reason why Blinken went to South Africa. And South Africa pretty much said to Blinken and the United States, stuff you, we're not gonna do whatever you want. We're a sovereign country, we'll do whatever we want. So obviously Blinken went there to get the South Africans to get away from the BRICS, and it's just not going to work, guys. It's definitely not going to work. Then you got Brazil in there as well, and I can see a real fast de-dollarization of happening over the next few years. And if you think about how currency works and how currency moves around the world, and I'm going to get into this story a bit later on as well. President Xi is also making a trip to Saudi Arabia, and they're also going to be talking about Saudi Arabia joining the BRICS, and they're also going to be talking about selling oil to China in Chinese yuan as well. So that's going to be discussed and probably going to be agreed beforehand, because you have to understand, President Xi does not travel to other countries just to have a chat, have a chit chat. Most likely a lot of discussions have been going behind the scenes, and it's only a case of him going there, signing the papers and making a press conference. And if you think about what happened when China had the Winter Olympic Games, Russia, especially Putin, went to China and they signed some massive gas deals, gas pipe deals. So you see most of the negotiation happens behind the scenes, and then when they meet face to face, they just sign the dotted papers, they sign the contract, and that's it, make a speech, and that's it, they go from there. That's how Russia and China work. The way Biden works, he goes all the way to Saudi Arabia, does a fist pump with MBS. He doesn't even get greeted in the airport. And you will see when President Xi goes to the airport, he will be greeted by MBS. He will be given the red carpet. And Blinken goes in there to have a chat with MBS, goes there to beg. and it comes out with nothing. Except the only thing it came out with to open up Saudi airspace to the Israelis. And how is that good for the Americans? Nothing. It's absolutely ridiculous. So Bloomberg warns of EU recession. Yeah, good one, Bloomberg. No shit, Sherlock. I mean, I'm just not going to even bother talking about this, because this is Bloomberg is just being a bunch of idiots. Obviously, there's going to be a recession. Most of the countries in the EU are already in the recession. So we're going to go to Ukraine now. Ukraine struggles to find money to pay for troops. As you know, less and less money is going to Ukraine now. Western countries, especially the United States and Britain and other EU member states, are starting to be a lot more stingy with their money. Less and less money is being sent to Ukraine now, and Ukraine now is struggling to pay for their troops. And I just don't see Ukraine lasting much longer, because as soon as you stop paying your troops are not going to want to fight. They'll just surrender. They'll think, you know what is the point of fighting? I'm not getting paid. What do they want me to do? Die for my country and not get paid? I mean, yeah, that's fine. You want to die for your country, but you got to get paid at least. You got a family to feed. You know, being in the army is a job. You know, nobody does it for fun. You know, you could be killed at any point. You know, you need to be paid for it, and paid handsomely. It's got to be worth it. So yeah, things are not looking good for Ukraine at the moment, and like I said, you know, there's a huge amount of corruption going on in Ukraine, and a lot of the money that goes to Ukraine probably doesn't end up to the Ukrainian army. A lot of it is siphoned off, money laundering. Lots of it goes into the oligarchs. Some of it gets transferred back to the US, well, in parts of the military-industrial complex. So there's only part of the money goes to Ukrainian troops, but the rest of the money just gets siphoned off. You know, Ukraine is now a #1 money laundering state at the moment. You know, if you want to launder your money, you send it to Ukraine, and that's it. There's a crazy Guardian article, and it says here, as Putin's war spreads panic across Europe, Ukrainians must fear stab in the back. And it's written by Simon Tisdall, and I just can't believe this guy got away with writing such an article. So obviously the title doesn't say the whole story. He's talking about locking up Putin as the only resolution. And you can see here he's asking for locking up Putin. He's asking for Putin to be kidnapped and being tried for war crimes and being locked up, and that's the only way Ukraine can survive. Otherwise, when winter comes, there'll be no more money left for Europe to give to Ukraine, and Ukraine will be stabbed in the back. And it's absolutely crazy how a Western journalist is actively asking for other world leaders to be kidnapped and locked away, regime change and things like that. It's crazy. I thought we're living in a democracy, and how these Western article guys get away with creating such filth. And you know, Guardian used to be a paper I used to admire back in the day when I was young. I used to think, you know, people that read the Guardian are intelligent, but you know, the Sun is more intelligent than the Guardian at the moment. At least with the Sun, you know what you're gonna get. They just want to have a bit of fun, and you know, you just don't take the article seriously. It's just a bit of fun. But with Guardian, you know, it's not that. It's 100% serious, and it's crazy what the things that they get away with. And I want to talk about Ukrainians shelling the nuclear plant at the moment. And I love how the West likes to paint the fact that it's Russia's fault. Russia's the one that's doing it, but Russia is actually occupying these nuclear power plants, and it's the Ukrainians who are shelling. So President Zelensky has come out saying that he wants more sanctions to be placed on Russia. He warned of the consequences of potential catastrophe at Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Shelling near the plant has caused widespread alarm. I love how the paper doesn't mention that the Ukrainians are shelling. It just says shelling near the plant. So they're trying to get people to think that it's actually the Russians that's doing it. New satellite imagery released by Planet Labs shows that the aftermath of shelling near the plant which Russia seized in March. So they're admitting that Russia seized it in March. So if Russia have seized it, why would the Russians shell their own people and their own plants? It just makes no sense. So they acknowledge that Russia has seized it, but they don't mention that Ukrainians are shelling the plant. It's absolutely ridiculous. Ukrainian and Russian installed officials have traded accusations over who's responsible for their attacks. Obviously, it's Ukrainians that's responsible. See how they try and cover up Ukrainian tracks. It's absolutely crazy. But, you know, if Ukraine does manage to hit one of these nuclear power plants and it causes some sort of catastrophe like Chernobyl, you know, it'll be completely Ukrainians' fault. I believe that they are getting really desperate now. Obviously, they are bombing Crimea. They are bombing nuclear power plants. They know that they have lost the south, and they know they have lost that power plant near the south. So if Ukraine destroy that nuclear power plant, all they're going to do is cause, you know, mayhem. They'll have obviously widespread condemnation by the world. There'll be more calls for Russia to stop the war, and Russia will be very much occupied trying to clean up the mess after that as well, because that if that nuclear power plant gets blown up, then they're going to have to, you know, basically move a lot of people away from that area, and they're going to have to close that area down. It's a nightmare, to be honest. If it becomes like another Chernobyl, it's going to be an absolute nightmare. So I believe Ukraine is getting rather desperate, and they see doing things like that will slow the Russians down, and it will cause more people to call for the end of the special military operations. Germany is having major issues as well, and you can see here, cost of Germany's new gas tax revealed. Berlin seeks to distribute high costs of replacing Russian gas amongst the households and industrial consumers. So they are asking end consumers up to $600 annually, an extra tax to pay for replacing Russian gas. So let me tell you something. Did Scholz consult the German public before he announced all these sanctions on Russia? Did he say to the German public, listen guys, I'm going to sanction Russia, you guys will have to take the hit, you guys will have to pay more tax, you know, but we're doing it for a good cause, we're doing it for Ukraine, so you guys have to live and bear with it. You got me? Who's with me? Come on, put your hands up. Who's with me? Who wants to pay 600 euros extra per year to pay for replacing Russian gas? Nobody in Germany would agree to it. Nobody. So this guy and his little merry men basically went out their own, decided to be poodles of Americans, and literally destroying their own country, destroying the industry, going to be destroying the middle class of Germany, and they got themselves to blame. I just gotta say, I have no sympathy for them whatsoever. They got themselves to blame for this. And you can see already things are happening in Berlin. Berlin turning off city lights to save energy. They're asking people not to have long showers. They're asking people to have showers less often. So they want Germans to be stinky, basically. You know, as you know, it's very, very hot this summer. So if you're going to be hot, you're going to be sweating a lot. I mean, I for one have 3 showers a day. If some government official comes up to me and says, AJ, you know what, you need to we need to save some money on gas, so you need to have less showers and less often, I'll just tell him, screw you, man. I'm not walking around smelly, you know, stinking like I'm homeless or something, walking around the street. If you want to do that, that's your problem, but that's not me. That's not what I'm gonna do. I mean, seriously, how can you ask someone to not to have more showers a day, or not to have it more often? It's absolutely ridiculous. You're talking about hygiene here. You know, hygiene is very important, and if you don't keep yourself clean, if you don't keep yourself well showered, then you're going to end up with diseases, or you're going to give somebody else diseases. It's absolutely ridiculous. The German hunt for Middle Eastern gas fails. As you know, Germany has been begging to Qatar, begging to Saudi Arabia, and none of that's happening. Obviously, there's an issue with Iran when it comes to the JCPOA. They had a discussion, I believe, a few days ago, and it doesn't look like it's going to go anywhere. The Americans are not backing down, and the Iranians are not backing down, so I don't think that deal will be signed anytime soon. So Germans are pretty much screwed, unfortunately. So we'll talk a bit more about Ukraine. This news just came in. At least 6 explosions hit Crimean airbase in nearly an hour. So it looks like Ukraine is using maybe those HIMARS to attack Crimea like they said they would. And Russia did say that if Ukraine starts bombing Crimea, then all gloves are off. Things will escalate very fast. So I'm hoping for some restraint by Russia, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. I think they're going to go all out now, and they'll start bombing further into Ukraine, and they'll probably start taking more territory in Ukraine, and they're not going to stop. They'll use these HIMARS as an excuse to take more territory. They'll go all the way to Odessa, they'll go all the way to Moldova, and they'll say, look, we have to do this because of the HIMARS. We need to protect our citizens, and we need to go further into Ukraine, because if not, these HIMARS will get us. We're going to be sitting ducks. So we need to go further and further into Ukraine to protect us from these HIMARS. And the Americans and the Ukrainians have just given Russia an excuse to go further into Ukraine, and that's what they're going to do. I don't see Russia stopping anytime soon. I think they'll go all the way to Moldova, and they'll also go all the way to the river as well that cuts Ukraine in half. And once they do that, Ukraine will probably crumble by then, to be honest. I think by the end of the year they'll probably crumble. They won't have any money left to pay the troops or pay their normal public services, and the whole country will just collapse. The Guardian recently had an article today, I believe it was today that I read, and they said that the West will stab Ukraine in the back in the winter. And they will stab Ukraine in the back in the winter because during winter times, especially Germany, they will really struggle with no gas, and they believe that Germany will do a big U-turn and say really, really sorry to Russia, and they will basically turn their backs on Ukraine, and followed by the rest of EU, and things like that will happen as well. And the US will probably turn its back as well after the midterms. Biden will lose pretty badly, and they will probably turn their backs on Ukraine, because Ukraine and Afghanistan has been hurting Biden a lot. So they will understand that, and they will turn their backs after the midterm. So Ukraine is coming up to a real dark few months, and I believe by November, by December, it's going to be all over. Ukraine will collapse, and Russia will basically dictate terms, or Russia will go straight into Moldova and take Odessa and take whatever they want. By then, the army will probably collapse. So either way, Ukraine is going to be no more. It's going to turn out into a rump state. Oh, by the way, regarding the rump state, I made a video yesterday and I kept saying rump steak, and thank you for a couple of you guys for pointing it out. I'm a big steak fan, as you know, but I can't eat steak because my missus is vegetarian, so I'm always dreaming about steak when I see food or when I'm hungry. So when I meant rump state, I meant rump steak. Oh no, I mean the other way around. Anyway, let's move on. As you know, President Xi Jinping expected to visit Saudi Arabia next week, so expect some major deals to be done, and this is going to be headline news, and the Americans are not going to be happy, I'll tell you that right now. Russia-China deal reaches a major milestone, and they have already surged to 200 billion this year. I believe last year was about 100 billion, so they've already gone up by 100 billion in a year. This is going to go up to 300 billion by next year. As you know, there's a lot of trade going on between the two countries. They share a huge border. They've got train lines going between each other. All of these Western companies who have been moving out of Russia, all of these Chinese companies have been moving in. So this trade is just going to be higher and higher now that Russia will need a lot of goods from China, and vice versa as well. China will also need a lot of natural resources, food from Russia as well. So you can see these two countries working more and more closely with each other over the next few years, and they're going to be less and less reliant on the West, especially the United States, and more reliant on each other. So I didn't talk about Sunak for a few days. So Sunak recently said that he wants to ramp up sanctions against Iran. I mean, this guy must be an idiot of the day, because does he not know what's happening around the world? You know, the West needs Iran, Britain needs Iran. You know, they need to sign this JCPOA so they can start using some of Iran's natural resources like coal and oil and natural gas, minerals. So with everything that's happening around the world, you know, they need a replacement for Russian gas. So this guy wants to basically ramp up more sanctions on Iran. Like, Iran doesn't have enough sanctions on it already. I think there's about 1,800 sanctions on Iran at the moment, and he wants to add more. I mean, like, Iran cares. You know, they are literally being sanctioned to hell right now. And do you really think Iran's going to sit there and say, oh no, look, we got another 2 or 3 sanctions coming from the UK, oh crap, what are we going to do? You know, they don't really care. you know when you sanction a country so much, they don't really care if you're going to sanction them even more, because you've already maximum sanctioned it. It's ridiculous. So this story about Afghanistan all over again. Ukraine's rampant corruption means Western supply of weapons is likely eventually backfire. So this article is talking about Western weapons going in the arms of the dark web, going into the arms of, you know, ISIS and other terrorists who are, you know, openly buying stuff on the dark web. And this is going to hurt, you know, Western countries at some point. I mean, remember the time when US was giving a lot of arms and training to the Mujahideen, and eventually you've seen what happens when the Taliban take over, and imagine some of these terrorists now walking around with these Stinger missiles and, you know, these anti-aircraft missiles, and they can easily take a jet down. And you know, the Americans are now arming, you know, terrorists without even them knowing, and they know there's a massive corruption issue in Ukraine. They know that, you know, most of the weapons and money that goes into Ukraine does not end up in the hands of the people you want them to end up in. They end up in people's hands that you don't want them to end up. You know, the dodgy criminals and the terrorists out there. But they don't care. They're happy to just use Ukraine as a proxy war. They don't really think about the consequences unless it really happens to them one day and it really bites them in the arse. So talking about that, CBS recently released a documentary basically talking about this. They're talking about how Ukraine military aid basically disappears, and a lot of the oligarchs and criminals end up with most of the money, and rest of it only 30% ends up to the army or, you know, humanitarian groups and stuff, but most of the weapons and money ends up in the wrong hands. So the CBS documentary, you know, I must say, this documentary, I've seen it myself before they took it down, and this was a very much an anti-Russian documentary. This is no way an anti-Ukrainian documentary. This was a very much an anti-Russian documentary. It was had anti-Russian hate everywhere. But on one particular point, they did mention, or they did acknowledge, that most of these weapons they are sending to Ukraine, or most of the money they are sending, is disappearing, and Ukraine is very corrupt, and there's a lot of money laundering going on there, and a lot of weapons ending up in the dark web where terrorists are openly buying stuff. And they did acknowledge that. Unfortunately, the US government did not like that, and they called CBS the next day and got them to take it down. So and they did, like the poodles they are. So first of all, this proves that these news anchors have no freedom whatsoever. You cannot go around printing or doing whatever you want. Even though the video was very much anti-Russian, because they didn't like one really little segment, the US government basically knocked on the editor's door and said, listen, get rid of this documentary or else. And the editor's like, yes, whatever you say, well, yes, sir, and immediately cancelled the video, deleted it. But you can search for it and find it if you look hard enough. And it just goes to show that the media is completely controlled by the government, and there is no real press freedom whatsoever. The only guy who really had any press freedom is people like Julian Assange, and you got that guy Lannister. Is it Lannister, or who's the guy who's reporting in Ukraine? Anyone who kind of does any individual real journalism, they're the ones that get shut down, they're the ones that get put into jail, they're the ones that get demonetized. It's a shame, this world, and how the journalism has gone. Imagine this: when you're a kid, you want to grow up to be a journalist, and you have a dream. You want to be a journalist. You want to travel the world. You want to speak the truth. You want to send real news articles to the world. You want to be an investigative journalist. You want to find out the truth and spread it towards the rest of the people. And then you end up as a journalist. You do your degree. You spend 4 years in university. You end up with hundreds of thousands of student debt. You come to work in a anchor news, let's say The Guardian, and guess what? You have no freedom. You basically have to print everything that the editor tells you to do. So the editor says, write some shit about Russia, but why, sir? I don't care, just write some shit about Russia. But what do they do? I don't care, just find something and write it. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. And that's how journalism is nowadays. You have no freedom if you're a journalist. If you want to keep your job, you spread lies and you do whatever the editor tells you to do. It's an absolute shame, guys, and it's a shame for real journalists out there like Julian Assange, who are actually put in jail and made an example of. I'm also going to talk about Amnesty International. Amnesty International has put out an apology. Again, Amnesty International said that Ukraine is using civilians as human shields, and they are placing a lot of army staff around schools and hospitals and shopping centers. And obviously Ukraine didn't like that, and they complained, and Amnesty tracked back on what they said, and the US government again got involved. And Amnesty again is very much a US stooge. The US has been using Amnesty International for years as a tool, and using human rights as a weapon. And again, because they didn't like what Amnesty International reported, the US government got involved, and now they want the head of Amnesty International to be fired. They're asking for his resignation. Same thing happened to the UN diplomat who went to China, Xinjiang region, and she reported no genocide. When she got back, again, they are asking for her resignation because they didn't like what she reported. So it just goes to show, it doesn't really matter about what the truth is. It doesn't matter about who reports what truth. End of the day, all US cares about is their narrative, and if you go against their narrative, then you're in big trouble. So I'm going to talk about coal mining industry. So a lot of coal mining's industries in UK and around Europe is starting up again, and this coal mining stuff, this was deemed worthless a few years ago. They said because of the net zero targets and because of climate change and global warming, all of these coal mining industries are worthless. So a lot of people took their money out of these coal mining stuff. And recently, it's been reported some of these coal mining businesses are reporting 3,000% increase in profits. So if you haven't put shares into any coal mining places, I'll probably suggest you to do it now, because coal mining prices is still going to improve. And right now there's a lot of coal mines being opened up all over UK, all over Europe, because they are basically really scared about the winter. They don't have enough gas for winter. They don't have enough cheap Russian gas, so they are starting up all of these coal mines now to make up for it. So if you haven't put your money into coal mines or anything like that, I suggest you do it now if you want to make some quick bucks. Finally, I'm coming to the idiot of the day, and the idiot of the day is Biden. And Biden administration recently said that they refused to release the $7 billion in frozen funds from Afghanistan, even though the US forces have found and killed Al-Qaeda's leader in Kabul. So a couple of things really. $7 billion is not a big figure for a country like United States. However, it's a major figure for a country like Afghanistan. They're having a huge humanitarian crisis. Lots of children are dying. So it's an absolute tragedy that the US has decided to steal the $7 billion from Afghanistan. Absolute tragedy. It's the children and the poor who are going to be suffering. And if there was a way they can release this money, but obviously release it to humanitarian companies or something who can go there and help these people, even that's a start. Even they can do that, but they refuse to do that even, which is a real shame really. I'm also going to talk a bit about Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda's leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri. And I believe that, I don't believe all of these stories about them killing Zawahiri and stuff like that. I think they have been keeping tabs on him for years. They knew his whereabouts. They know where he is, where he's going to be. They know where he's living. In fact, they probably have been talking with him as well. Because you got to understand the timing of it all. They killed Zawahiri at a time when the US or Biden needed a bit of good news, because Biden has not been having a lot of good news lately, especially with Ukraine, and obviously you've got to look back into Afghanistan, and then obviously the economy is not doing well. So they needed a bit of good news. So one way they can get a little bit of good news is to kill an Al-Qaeda leader. So this is what the US does, right? Basically, they keep a tab on al-Zawahiri. They're probably even talking with him. They know where his whereabouts is. They know where he lives, and they just keep a tab on him. And when things are good in the United States, when the economy is doing well, and everybody in Biden's approval ratings doing well, they don't really care about Zawahiri. Zawahiri doesn't really have much power in Al-Qaeda anymore. When's the last time you've seen Al-Qaeda doing an attack of anywhere around the world of the past 10-20 years? He doesn't really have much power. So this is what happens. As soon as things go badly pear-shaped in the United States, and they need a bit of good news and also midterms are coming up as well, so they need some really good news. They need some plus points. So what do? They blow up Zawahiri, because they know exactly where he is. They've known for years. They have basically waiting for the right moment. They're not going to do it when things are going well. They'll only do it when things are going really bad and they need a bit of good news. And they did the same thing with that guy as well, Bin Laden. They did the same thing with Bin Laden. They found him and killed him at a time when the US needed a bit of good news. So I believe it's all kind of fake news. They do it, it's all planned. I don't think any of it's unplanned. I don't think any of it's a coincidence. I think all of it is planned. That they do it at a time when they choose, or they think they need a bit of good news, and that's when they do it. By killing him, it's not going to really affect Al-Qaeda much, to be honest. The next person is going to be in charge, or Al Qaeda is going to split up into smaller groups. And that's what you've seen in Afghanistan. You have all of these small terrorist groups forming together, banding together, and they become even more dangerous than Al Qaeda. And this really doesn't do much. I mean, terrorism is still a problem out there. And in fact, you know, it looks like the Americans have forgotten about the war on terror, and they're going after Russia, they're going after China. But, you know, terrorism is still a problem out there, and there's all of these weapons going out, in and out of Ukraine. And I believe this might cause a major issue over the next few years if this is not put under any control whatsoever. So that's all I have for today, guys. Let me know what you guys think. I'll see you in the next video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want to support me and support my channel, don't forget you can join my Patreon or locals, and I'll really appreciate it, or you can just buy me a coffee. So thanks a lot, guys, and I'll see you soon.